So this is a personal story. Statistically, it has an N number of 1, but I thought you'd find it interesting because there's 17 years of experience and quite varied experiences. So I thought you'd be interested in knowing how one person managed rooftop solar. We often hear from people like Alex Canara, people on the West Coast and in California in particular, who complain about heat underneath the solar panels that tend to heat up the house underneath. And of course, that's not a problem here in Wisconsin. Plus, what you're seeing there in these two pictures it's not my house, but my garage. And that's the only part of the house where there is a southern exposure. But we'll get more back onto that in a moment. So you can see them divided here. 5 panels facing due south at 45 degrees, our latitude, nice angle. And on the left, we see them on the front part of the south-facing garage. And on the right, we see them in the south-facing eastern part of the garage, where you can see the sunlight coming in the morning. Now, let me define, first of all, what does photovoltaic solar power mean? Well, it's a clean, renewable source of energy that uses solar radiation to produce electricity. It's based on the photoelectric effect. That's the emission of electrons when electromagnetic radiation, in this case light, hits material, a particular material. The electrons are emitted in this manner, are known as photoelectrons, and they generate an electric current. To harvest the electromagnetic radiation and turn it into usable electricity, a semiconductor device known as a photovoltaic cell is used. These are commonly made from monocrystalline, polycrystalline, or amorphous silicon. However, other thin film semiconductor materials can also be used, and we'll touch on that a bit later. But this is not to be confused with passive solar power. That's based on simple absorption of heat by rooftop water tubes, where warmed water is simply pumped to a swimming pool or interior water-based radiator. I had thought of doing this with half of my system, and the focus on energy people, which I'll talk about in some detail, strongly advised me not to do that because the garage is at the one end of the house, and any connections to the pool would be at the far end of the house, and the passive solar would lose a lot of its capacity and heating to do that. And they felt that with only a total of a few panels, that it would be pointless to divide it up. And so I listened to them. In fact, I listened to Focus on Energy quite a bit, sometimes with good results, sometimes not quite so good. Well, what attracted me to solar energy in the first place? I was kind of intrigued by this car on the left called the Aptera. It's named after a wingless dragonfly. It's a 3-wheel vehicle, only sold in California, and it has small batteries in it for reserve, but it's primarily designed as a solar car, and is really only popular in California, where the sun is shining a great deal more than in other states with extended winter seasons. On the right, we have a glider, a 2-place glider with gallium arsenide panels. I met Eric Raymond at some meetings out in California and asked him, at that time I had a 2-place amphibious airplane called a Coot, And I asked him what it would take to put those nice curved gallium arsenide panels on my coot. And he said, he says, I don't think you want to do that. I said, why? He said, well, you'd only increase the flying duration of your coot by about 17%. And he said the cost would be at least 3 times the value of the entire airplane. So I don't think that has changed. But I may have shown you pictures of Eric Sunseeker and other avenues, and he's a strong advocate of solar power in flying, and there's been some lovely flights around the Italian Alps. You can see the motor. It's a electric motor assisted glider, and there's a thin little device mounted on the tail for getting him airborne, and then he shuts it off, fans the blades so they don't drag, and just soars from there. So anyway, both of these things in transportation got me interested in solar energy in the first place. And from there, I started to look at my own house. Well, back of the house that you see here faced due east, the front of the house, therefore, due west. So it was really hard to find anything facing south. You can see here a section of the house over the kitchen and breakfast nook area. But then here is the edge of the garage, and you can see a slope that's 45 degrees, and that we decided to use. So I called up the Focus on Energy people, FOE, in 2007. And we discussed all sorts of things, how many panels it would take, the total cost. This was a considerably important one, future tree shade growth. We had some friends next door. They were from Serbia. We really liked them, and we didn't want to upset them, but they had some tall pines growing, and Focus on Energy did warn us appropriately that those pines could grow and could get in the way of some of the sunlight. We took that into consideration, and we're very careful with how we handled our neighbors who had these tall pines and did not want to top them. We then went into a copy of their plan, and I'll go through more of that with you. And eventually, because we've been chipping in to, I think it was called Second Harvest or something like that, we were eligible to apply to Alliant Energy for a 10-year contract that went from 2009 to 2019. And it raised the value of generated electricity from, we generally paid about 10 cents, varying slightly through the day, to 25 cents per kilowatt hour. And that was a significant shortening of the time to have this basically paid for. Some of these solar projects could take 20 years to pay for themselves, and that would be sort of reduced, I would say, in half by this nice 10-year contract from Alliant Energy. I think they weren't the first to start it. Madison Gas and Electric were, but we only got our gas from them. We had to get our electricity from Alliant, and Alliant, I think, was reluctantly went along with Madison Gas and Electric, and they did the same sort of thing. So in this photograph or sketch, and I'm sorry it's out of focus, over the years it got a little fuzzy, but this then is the garage here, and this is the 45-degree angle, and this is the area between the garage and the main body of the house, where there's a kitchen and a breakfast nook. So allowing for this space, when you look at it from this direction toward the garage, you can see that there's space for 5 panels here and 5 panels here. And they're connected together in the superstructure of the garage and wired to go through to the to a very important tool, which I think will be coming up shortly. I'll show you that in a few minutes. The ingredients of solar panels are varied. There's cadmium telluride, copper indium selenide, cadmium gallium diselenide, hexafluoroethane, lead, polyvinyl fluoride. But we have to remember too that in addition to all these chemicals that we don't like to get in our environment and want to be careful when disposing of solar panels, that they are mounted on strong frames of aluminum covered with tough glass that rarely breaks in a hailstorm. As you know, we've all had hailstorms, never had one break from the hail. They stood up to it very well. So this is the receipt of installation, and the panels came from Mexico. They were called Hirosira, and each panel was 200 watts. So that would be, with 10 of them, you'd have 2 kilowatts. And this is really important, this Magnatech inverter. I'll go into this in considerable detail a little bit later, but that added significantly to the cost. There's $2,000 there, and not only did I have to pay that outright, but there was a chunk of money of $4 or $5 every month in addition that was added on to my electric bill for the rental of this piece of equipment, which wasn't really fully paid for, apparently. So the whole business came to $17,735 here in green. It's a lot of contrast. And I did get from that some federal benefit to take that 17,000. I think it's probably I've forgotten the percentage now, probably a third of that cost or so was borne by federal credits at the time. So this is 5 of the panels on one side of the garage and 5 are on the other side. This pool here is not, well, that was decided on long before the solar panels, but that became a major issue, which I'll talk about later as we get into recommendations from the Focus on Energy people. So this is what it looked like from their thing. They have, you can see this pale blue line here where they're warning me of the trees from the neighbors, and they say, and this allows for different seasons and so on, and showing what the solar timer relates to is when there might be some shielding from trees. So I had a nice 45-degree roof slope, but there was no space for more than 10 panels, 5 on each side. By the time the day was over, you can see it was starting to get dark. And so this was the front or west side of this south-facing garage roof, and taken at late afternoon. And this was the east-facing, well, eastern, I should say, south-facing roof down here. Now, I have a hunch that I showed this slide to this group back around 2013, but not all of you, not many of you are still here since then. So I thought I could sneak the picture in again. But basically what it shows is that that the predictions that somebody had made, I'm not sure who made this predictions, but probably focus on energy, these projections fit very well with what was actually generated. The red, yellow, and blue refer to or clustered together the different years. There's no tendency for significant changes. They were all within variations of weather. But what I want to bring to your attention to is that there's a significant period of time, a good 2 months in the spring and a good couple of months in the fall, when you're just not generating. It's not predicted and it's not observed. So that is something to recognize. Wisconsin is not Alaska. It's not even northern Minnesota. And southern Wisconsin, not that far from Chicago. So this is not an outrageously northern set of data, and shows agreement between projections and real data, but it's certainly not very useful for if you don't have long-lasting support during the winter. Batteries simply wouldn't do it. So storage, way back then and still persisting today, in my opinion, is not going to get you through a Wisconsin winter. So what do? Well, back then, as you can see, I got up a ladder. I didn't climb onto the roof because that's the treacherous part. As long as I had my feet on the ladder itself, I could use a 30-foot extension on a cleaning device that would withstand the ice. There was a lot of snow back then that would follow ice. And so you get this ice layer, and then the snow would form on top. And if you didn't do something like this, you could go for weeks with zero energy. And being a keen sort of solar guy and motivated to do what I could to help it along, I did this sweeping for several winters before I finally gave up on it. And I think the weather changed a little bit too, so we didn't have quite so much ice forming. Well, first impressions were favorable. I was really hooked on this, and this is the net energy use that I was going through typically per day, about 30 kilowatt hours per day. And I found that after putting the solar panels on, I was only using a third as much. Now, this is not year round. This is I've got these dates here, but they may have been averages, but there was some solar that I didn't put on here. So in other words, certain times of the year when I did not have the swimming pool pump on and so on, I could keep this when not including generated energy. If I just looked at energy consumption, there was quite a drop, and that was all very encouraging, and the intermittency wasn't an issue because Alliant Energy and Madison Gas and Electric, for those of you who use that, we might get a power outage for 20 minutes or so, but they're pretty good usually at getting things fixed, not like we've seen with the hurricanes down south this past month or so. So it hasn't been too bad in terms of intermittency. Well, I also purchased, as part of the inverter, a special meter. I put this in yellow because I'm going to relate to this in two aspects. This yellow comment, this meter is used for measuring solar input in real time and at day's end. And so this is the conversion of direct current from the into inverted alternating current for house use. But notice down here in this corner, this is an interesting little gadget. And what it allowed me to do is measure, particularly I like to measure it around noon on June the 21st. After all, this is the first day of summer, the summer solstice. And this is what the capacity, solar panels are sold on the basis of their capacity at this time of the year. And I thought, well, if I get to really study the day, think about the day. I was semi-retired at this point, not seeing very many patients, had lots of time in the afternoons usually to putter around and play with the system. And I found that if I guesstimated, it was like a game. I'd think about how much energy I'd use that day, how much, what the sky looked like, how cloudy it was, how many kilowatts I might have made that day. And then I'd think, well, what about right now? What about if it's noon? What if it's 3 in the afternoon? Looking at the cloud cover and wondering, how many kilowatts am I making at this moment? And it was a funny game, but if you're kind of interested in something like this, it makes you very aware of the energy you're using. Out in Applewood here, I ran the water utility, and I would talk to my neighbors and say, it's good to have clean water, and I suggest that you not use True Green and all these chemicals, because we're drinking the water that comes down on our lawns, ultimately going into 2 wells. And then while I was on the subject, I said, by the way, I'm having fun with my solar system. If any of you would like to come over and see it, I'd be glad to show it to you. I didn't get a single call or any mention of the faintest interest. And as some of the houses sold off from my elderly neighbors and young neighbors moved in, I noticed that some of them were paying attention. They were not putting so much True Green, and every now and again, I'd see some dandelions spring up. So I was realizing that they were, perhaps this younger generation was getting a little more environmental. But then to my horror, I noticed that they leave their lights on, not just at night, but all day long. I was tempted to knock on their doors and say, the previous owners might not have shown you where the light switch is, because why on earth would you be letting your lights go all day long? For somebody as concerned as I was about energy, when you've got panels on your roof, you just don't think about letting the lights run all day. And so, but I didn't have the gall to do that, but I wanted to. So that's the level of my concern. And this white part that you see in white is direct quote, pretty much, yeah, from the first sentence. I wrote to, forgotten now to whom, anyway, somebody, and they wrote back and said, the city of Madison will require your system to become compliant with 2017 NEC codes if you change anything, even the panels, unquote. And then they went on to say your system will not be compliant with the need for rapid shutdowns, even though I think it was from when it went in the first place, but they felt it might not be. You will likely have to redesign and replace both the panels and the inverter. And then they finally said, you'd be better off selling your home as is, because I'm thinking about doing that and moving into Oakwood. And they said, and just let the new owners size the solar for their own energy needs. Probably good advice, but rather disconcerting. So those 2 aspects of this same photograph I include here in relation to this. So these are the data. The predicted loss when you install it is supposed to be 2%. In other words, if I put on 2,000 watts or 2 kilowatts, I should lose no more than 2% in the installation. Well, it was 10% for me. I never got anything over 1,800 watts out of a 2,000 watt system. And I mentioned this, and they said, "Oh, you should have contacted them. They got guarantees and so on." That was never offered. I just figured it was, nobody told me otherwise. And so I just figured it was part of the system. I asked them why, and they said, well, they're just not as efficient when they first go on. But what concerned me much more was this is what, to the best of my knowledge, they're still telling you, if you want to put solar panels on your roof, that you can expect to lose about 1% per year. Certainly didn't happen to me. 34%, twice that, was lost over 17 years. So that's the hard data that came out of my system. As I say, n equals 1, but it did not leave me with a very good feeling about. I learned a lot about solar energy and what it can do on your roof and what it won't do in the wintertime, but I felt that it didn't live up to what they predict. Now I'm coming near the end of my talk, but before doing so, I wanted to share a couple of neat things with you. First of all, this aerial photograph means quite a bit to me. This is an airport north of Seattle, Washington. And I've been to this airport many times because in the days when I had a coot, we used to have meetings and show various coots under construction all along here. So I got to know this field quite well. Apparently, they're now planning to put in, and this might be under construction, some solar panels. I pointed out here, media sources tend to promote any new technology based on loose thinking restricted to upfront costs. They focus on the capacity, not on the actual energy delivered. And they ignore the toxicity of solar manufacturing. They routinely do this. They fuss and fuss about nuclear waste, but they don't talk at all. Just drift right over the top of any discussion of the toxicity of solar manufacturing, recycling, and limited panel durability. And when I saw this in a aviation magazine, I lifted the whole thing, and I make this so you get this quote: at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, it will be 30 years to break even on the cost, writes a guy, Jim H. He says, by then, though, the panels will have degraded about 30% or have failed, needing replacement. Large-scale PV is not cost-effective. Home solar PV might, but then you're just prepaying your electric bill, assuming that none of the parts fail. With all the PV and wind in California, the cost of electricity has gone up 400% in 18 years. It's now 42 cents per kilowatt hour. So I thought that was an interesting viewpoint to share with you about a place that I'm quite familiar with out west, where the climate, yeah, they're north of us. They're probably the 45th parallel or so, as opposed to, what are we at, the 40th, 45th. But they're not too different otherwise, and they have a milder climate than we do. This photograph, I'm grateful to Stephen Shellen, who used to work at this place called Point Beach Nuclear Plant. He's very proud of the fact that it took them a fairly short time to build this plant, to get it up and running. He's part of our Friends of Fishing group, and that gives us a lot of helpful information. What I found most amazing is these blue-gray zones. All these that you see here are displays of pretty flat solar panels. They might be angled a degree or two, certainly not 45 degrees. And these are, we wonder why on earth would they take a plant that has regularly gets 20-year renewals, been now running for some 60 years, and I think they've applied for another 20 that'll bring them up to 80. Hopefully it will be approved. Why would they fill the fields with solar panels that some people have calculated, a famous professor in England to be, if you take all into account, about 1 billion-fold less energy dense than fission. And so here is Lake Michigan. This is not north. The north would be angled up like that. But for them to have put in all these solar panels, the public, for some reason or other, must have decided that even though it's a nuclear plant, it might blow up someday. So let's put in some solar panels around it to provide a modicum of safety. I'm not quite sure the rationale, but it kind of blows me away. And I thank Stephen for sending that photograph. And finally, this is I did a bit of research on how can we recycle solar panels? Well, there is a company called Solar Cycle. It's active in Arizona and Texas, rapidly expanding across this country. They recycle 95% of the material in the panels. Notice it's not 100. And they admit to that and say they're striving. They show pictures of the powdered panels. It looks like a little yellowish powder. They deal mostly with truckloads of panels. But it does take energy and it does take machinery. As you can see here, you can see somebody in the distance here with a vest on overlooking this automated system where they're trying to harvest this material. In other places, they will take your panels, but you need to deliver them there yourself, and they will charge you $30 a piece for the panels when they take them off your hands. And those are done in a different way. They're simply, they lift off the aluminum and the glass, they slide out the photovoltaic on a panel, and they chop it up in a fine chopper. And then they say, what do we do with that powder? Well, we just put it in the next load of concrete that we make. So that's not what I would call recycling. That's what I would call dumping valuable materials and sticking it in some cement, which doesn't make me feel very good. If that were radioactive, there'd be all hell to pay. But anyway, that's what's been done at most places, and they're trying with this, but it doesn't get very far very fast. So that is my my talk, and I'm happy to entertain it. You've been very quiet and attentive. I'm happy to open it up to any questions.
I would like to share a more limited experience. I live part of the time in Israel and part of the time in the United States. Some of you may have visited Israel and you witness the forest of solar panels and water heaters on the roofs of Israeli apartment buildings. Most Israelis live in apartments. There isn't enough land for single homes. Those systems are basically designated for water heating, and most Israelis pay very little for heating their water. The systems consist of solar panels. I think for each unit, 2 solar panels that are about each of them about 2 square meters. They are connected with copper pipes. They go down, and the water heater is on the roof as well. I don't know technically how they work very well, but Wisconsin, Minnesota is one thing, but of course we have California, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, a lot of states where they have enough sunlight, enough warmth in the summer, in the spring, in the fall, to save a lot of money on. Now, in the old construction that some of you have seen if you visit Israel, on each roof there is just a forest of the apartment building. There's a forest of solar. It's not very aesthetic. In the new construction, there's a lot of new construction of high rises in Israel, 15 stories, even 25 stories. They organize it on the roof in a much more aesthetic fashion. The problem is that people who live on the lower floors, it takes a lot more time for the hot water to come down. People that live in the higher floors, which are close to the receptors and to the tanks, are getting their hot water in seconds. Again, I don't know how practical it is, but again, as I said, when you buy a home in Israel, the first thing you ask the person that sells it, do you have a solar system? And if you don't have a solar system, you really will be a detractor in terms of buying that apartment. Again, this is limited use. It's for heating water, but they use it in hospitals, they use it in factories, they use it in homes. And as they say, Israelis pay pennies to heat water. All you need, even in the winter, is 2 hours of sun, and you have enough hot water for 4 or 5 people to take a shower.
Thank you so much for that information. I'm so glad that I mentioned the big difference between passive solar and photovoltaic. And what you're describing, as you say, is passive. And for that region of the world, it works relatively well. And that makes perfect sense to me to use passive. That's not what today's subject was about. Right. We're really focusing on photovoltaic here. But nonetheless, it's nice to know that in certain parts of the world that it can be done as practically as you describe it. And I thank you for letting us know about that.
Yeah, I think that the system, it costs about $1,000 or $1,500. Usually pays for it in 4 years. You pay for the system that you put in. You have to probably replace it every 20 years.
The nice thing is you don't have waste. It's just a pipe with hot water.
Right. To add to that, I mean, Alan had a talk on that about a year ago, and Mert and some other, I don't know if Mert's on the line here, but there's some other people who installed those things in Wisconsin and had pretty good luck with it. I see a lot of that kind of installation when I go out west to California. That's been out there for years. Not California, Colorado, the South, and maybe Colorado, because I don't know if it works better with their altitude, but you know, it's these systems work quite well for heat. And you know, if you had to supplement it, you could supplement it with a heat pump water heater and have the two work together in some way based on season or number of levels down or what. But heat pump water heaters are a whole nother issue, and they're still kind of pricey. The price has to go down on those. And I don't know why it isn't. But anyway, I'll stop with that.
Okay, Dottie, you had your hand up.
I don't have much experience other than from this class with solar systems, but I have friends who have property in the Caribbean and the properties that they rent out. And this has been like 10, 12 years ago, they had a lot of solar for heating water and also producing electricity. And they had used all kinds of green technologies, and they were very effective for island use. I was just going to say, I really think solar still has a role in special circumstances where there's limited access, where resources would have to be trucked in. At any rate, I think there's still a role in many cases for both passive and photoelectric solar in specialized circumstances.
Good point. Alan, did I see your hands up?
Yeah, I could both comment on Dorothy's thing plus bring up another topic. I'll just comment on Dorothy's thing right there, is that both RV campers and people who live full-time on sailboats, traveling around the world, that they have independent energy sources, lots of solar panels and wind, but they have very low electrical demand. To have a refrigerator on a boat is the highest demand thing there is. And the easiest way to cruise around the world is to learn how to live without a refrigerator. And,
oh, no.
And I see some RVers go that way too. They got a lot of flat surface on the top of their RV, and they can carry big batteries around that can tide them over. And again, it's the refrigerator that's the hog, and some have gas powered refrigerators as well. But anyway, my first raising of hand was regarding the angle of solar panels to the sun. Now, Richard, yours seem to be more or less perpendicular to the sun's rays at certain times of the year. And as I think we all know, that the panels are rated with the sunlight absolutely perpendicular to the panel. And that's the only way you could rate it, you know, and everything else is less. And the fact is that everything else is what really happens, because the sun's rays rarely hit the panels directly full on. And I passed through a 400-acre new solar field with rotating panels, and I constantly amazes me that they're not angled perpendicular to the sun's rays. They're aligned more or less on long shafts that rotate them east and west, but not north and south at all. And so they're just allowing a big loss right off the bat, because they're never ever perpendicular to the sun at any time, because the sun almost always coming from the south in a fashion, and they're not pointed that way at all. And yet I'll watch these things as they rotate through the day, and I'll take a look at the sun, and it's not even close to being perpendicular. It could be if they had better tracking, it could be, but they don't even make a naked attempt to do that.
No, they're pretty much 30% or 35%, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're not 45.
Yeah. So, you know, Alliant Energy always is boasting in our papers that they're putting in some new solar field, and it's going to be capable of, you know, so many megawatts of energy and power so many homes. And, you know, they're using the 100% rating of the solar panels and not the real world energy production. So it's all kind of bogus. On the other hand, down the street, we have here in Rockford, the Chinese got some sort of compensation from the city of Rockford to put in a solar panel manufacturing plant, which has never been in operation. And in the beginning, they had 3 full rotation, 3-axis tracking poles out front. And it was interesting to watch those, where they would get perpendicular sunlight throughout the day, up until they started dying, and now they're like pointed in totally different directions from one another. That's like, and there's rarely a car in the parking lot. So there's a lot going on in that particular side of the world. But whenever you read in the paper that a new solar field is going to produce so much energy, it's just kind of like giggle to yourself, no way. So and Richard has experienced it himself firsthand here. So
but a comment to that, Alan, as you get into fall and winter, you know, the angle of the sun does go down to 30 degrees, and so the sun's angle does change based on the season. But as far as optimal during the warm season, yeah, it'd be better if it could adjust. So that adjustment would not be very much. It'd be incremental to the season and left alone for several days at a time. It wouldn't have to keep adjusting constantly.
Yeah,
you know,
well,
if they did it.
in defense of Alliant, who put these things in with our taxpayer money, no doubt, is that their kind of tracking is cost effective. You know, 3-axis tracking is a whole different ball game from 1-axis tracking. They come along and they talk about all these great jobs. The jobs are all construction stuff. These guys go out and pound posts into the ground all day long for months. And then put up systems, and then they're gone. The jobs don't stay around the community at all. These people are transients. I never did find out where they come from. You'll see license plates from all over the country in their parking lots, which are, by the way, locked up, and you can't go in and talk to anybody. Or even going in and ask us, is this thing working? I keep wanting, for the longest time, wanted to ask, is this thing working? Because you got some panels pointed one way and the other panels pointed the other way. What's going on here?
It's not working.
Good point. Thank you. Anyone else want to chip in on?
Looks like Lee's got her hand up there.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that we had a solar hot water system put on our house when we built it in 2004. And we had the solar installer, which was Light Energy Systems, now Full Spectrum Solar. At that time it was Light Energy Systems. Anyway, so they worked with the builder to get the optimal angle on the southern exposure of the house for the panels. And then we had a BTU meter on the system, and so I took data from that and I gave that after several years to a WPPI engineer, and she calculated our payback period for the solar hot water system. It was 80 years. I'm saying 80 years
God.
payback period. Okay.
Wow.
The other interesting thing is that at the time we had it put on our house, we asked them when we have to change our roof, redo our shingles, how do we go about doing that as far as getting the solar panels off and putting them back on again? And they said, oh, well, just contact us. We'll take care of it. Well, all right, 20 years later now, I'm looking at possibly redoing our roof. And so I contacted Full Spectrum Solar, and they said, oh, we don't do hot water solar anymore. We only do photovoltaics. And we no longer have the rigging or the expertise to take that solar system off your roof and put it back on again. And I'm finding that, basically they said hardly anybody's doing solar hot water in Wisconsin anymore. And, I even called Cardinal Heating. Cardinal Heating did solar photovoltaics for a while, and they totally got out of it, actually. I was shocked. And so now I said, well, how am I going to have my roof redone? And they said, well, you'll just have to throw your solar hot water system away. And I said, I don't want to do that yet because we just spent $10,000 getting a new solar hot water tank because it was leaking. And that
no.
solar hot water tank plus a new hot water heater, because they were tanks of the same vintage that we're both put in at the time that we built the house. So that's our experience. I just want to let you guys know. Now, I have a question for you all. Does anybody know anyone that will take a solar hot water system off a roof and put it back on for you here in Wisconsin?
I would suggest to start calling people who advertise themselves as handyman. A guy or two with a couple of ladders and some, equipment to detach your equipment from the roof. It's just straightforward construction stuff. I could do it myself if I wasn't 70 years old. But
well, yeah, except that you got to think about this. Those fittings have been up there boiling in the sun for 20 years. Those pipe fittings are going to be darn hard to get loose. And then you've got to get that all off the roof intact. Okay, you can't just throw it down on the ground from the roof and expect you're going to take it back up and put it back up there later, right? And then it's going to not leak. I suspect that nobody's telling me this, but I bet that when they tried it in the past, that they found out that they could not get it to work again without leaking all over a brand new roof when they tried to reconstruct the solar hot water system.
The other way, Lee, is to just leave it in place and then flash around the whole thing, literally build the roof around the system. Treat it like it's a giant skylight. Skylight on your house is basically a hole in your roof that you have to build the roof around. And
yeah, just don't redo it underneath. Just don't redo it underneath where the
just don't redo it underneath. Just flash it off and goop it up and call it a day. Yeah. And what's underneath the solar panel is probably just like new when you put the solar panel on, because it hasn't had the sun beating on it, and it's been nice, shady, and soft under there. So it's probably fine. I would just flash around the thing and call it a day.
Possibly. It depends on how much ice and snow you get in there or within it. But maybe it isn't that bad, you know.
Mhm.
The handyman speaks. It's the
You have to have an
handyman
awful good
solution.
one.
Handyman had these.
Also, if you decided to disconnect it and take it off, what plumbers really do, and I recently paid a plumber a lot to change a pressure tank in my father-in-law's well system a lot. I thought it was going to be hard to disconnect the connections to get it loose. No, what the plumber did is he came in and cut the connection and put a rubber hose in. They were done. They were out of there in 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's
I would have never thought. I'll just cut the pipe and then put a rubber hose over it and call it a day. No, that's
well, what kind of pipe is it? Is it CPVC or some of this pipe could be a lot cheaper than the original. If it's metal pipe, that's a pain, or copper, that's a pain.
Yeah, I don't really know what's up there, actually.
Yeah.
A trip to the roof with you, Lee.
It's 2 stories
Our
in the
next
air.
tour,
It's,
our next
it's way
tour.
up there.
Yeah, you just got to be a little. Anyway,
We have before I go, we have a professor of physics, Don Reeder, here. Don, do you have any comments you'd like to make with all this PV versus passive, and what are your thoughts?
Well, frankly, we don't do the comparative analysis in detail. And for example, you talk about the waste problem of photovoltaic,
Yes.
even wind. There
Yeah.
is a significant waste problem. There is a discussion of how long it would take without replacement. And one of the interesting things in the newspaper today is how both above ground and below ground power systems have been destroyed by flooding by the hurricane in North Carolina. And the question then is, we know climate change is happening. Has that been factored into the economics? I really have been totally awestruck by the lack of economic and reasonable economic analysis. And it comes back to what we've known forever, that the best short-term solution is nuclear fission power, period.
Here. That one.
now there's preaching to the choir for you.
For
I've
sure.
got a
Good for you,
really
Don. I'll keep referring to you again and again.
that was pretty cool, Don. I have a question. I have a technical question for you, Richard, or somebody else.
Sure.
You listed this half dozen toxic elements that are in these systems. What are where's all that? Why is that needed? Is that what it takes to make a photovoltaic cell? All these complex toxic chemicals?
Yeah.
It sometimes makes them more efficient. Some people want thin ones around a curved surface, such as aircraft. So I was listing all the different possibilities. Gallium arsenide, of course, is very often needed for that. But it really just depends. What intrigues me is that there's been a lot of the conversation. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon?
That was Lee before she muted. Go ahead.
Oh, well, we're having a mixed conversation here of photovoltaic and passive, and they're just so totally different. And I think Dottie is correct that on certain islands, and in the Caribbean especially, there is a utility in passive, and that's true for small islands. The fact remains that there's a professor of physics here who used to be part of this group, who spends quite a bit of time in Hawaii, and he tells me that in spite of his strong requests to the people of Hawaii and the islands there, they bring in ships of liquid fossil fuel daily, vast quantities, with no apparent interest in switching to either passive or photovoltaic solar. And it's a huge waste of fuel. And I imagine that it's happening in other large sectors of the world. Indochina, I'm sorry, that's not the right word.
Indonesia
Vietnam.
Thank you. Indonesia has been burning coal because the Australians make coal very, very cheap, and they sell, they make coal equipment because they know Indonesia wants it. And Indonesia's finally wakened up. They've done some analysis of the population, and they're very pro-nuclear. So there are companies that's called Thorcon, and that are strongly working with Indonesia to put up some nuclear plants there so they don't have to have so much coal. And that's a concern because they have tsunamis in Indonesia, and so they're careful to put them on the lee side of the islands so that if they have a tsunami, it will less likely affect any plants, nuclear or coal. But so all these things are in evolution. You also heard me go on and on about Poland. It is by far the worst coal in Europe because it's a special kind of coal. I'm forgetting the name of it now. That is really toxic to the air and to the pulmonary system of the rest of Europe. And a lot of the rest of Europe is sort of downwind from Poland. So they have wised up, and they're putting in some American reactors, AP1000s, and those are now ordered already. So that's definitely planned for Poland. So these are happening. There's a huge, it's a complex subject, and I'm happy to see that people are waking up to nuclear. But what I basically wanted to do today was just to show that one person's response to nuclear, even with a 10-year contract, which was rather nice while it lasted, being paid 25 cents a kilowatt hour was kind of nice. But basically what they did was shorten the time. Other people say, well, they're just taking your money ahead of time that they're going to be raising because the cost of electricity is going to go up. We've seen that happen in Germany. Germany, when you compare Energiewende with the French system, is terrible. The cost of electricity in Germany is double that in France, and the quality of their emissions is about 10 times worse than France. So you have a comparison right next door to one another that most of Europe, most of the rest of the world is unaware of. And fortunately, we had Alan show us this electricity map, and he gave us a talk on this. It's a wonderful talk, and I think we should think back about the electricity map. It's a good thing to refer to from time to time and see who's doing. Yeah, Lou.
Yeah, just to circle back, this you mentioned the toxic stuff. Well, the new panels that are coming out, more efficient, 5% more perovskites, and they will be coming out and replace, and they're not toxic at all, from what I know.
I have a friend in England who's been involved with that. He's been telling me about that for close to 15 years. It's always in the future, sort of like fusion.
They're coming out. I think they've found ways to make it. You got to keep oxygen away from that whole thin layer of perovskite. Northwestern's been doing research on it. A lot of research been going on in this country with that, and it's more efficient. And and it's it's not toxic. There are other panels that aren't that toxic too, but I mean, other than the ones Richard mentioned, and I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know. And I know about this because countless scientists at Argonne, there was a couple of them that were really keen on it and did some work with it. But anyway, by the way, a lot of the schools in Grays Lake, right around me, a block away, 3 blocks away, they're just loaded with solar panels on their roofs, or independent arrays of solar panels that are tied to the school. They gave up land for that, and there's arrays all over the place around here that are doing it. And part of it was, I think, the state of Illinois had a nice deal going with putting these things in, but they've been working. Nobody's been. I don't have a report on them, but they're around.
I hope they don't lose activity as rapidly as I did.
No,
34% in 17 years is not good. But the ability to recycle, the cost, the energy that's required, and so on, it's still a big problem. But then again, wind turbines are just as bad, if not worse. They make no attempt to do anything but cut them up into quarter lengths and stick them in some prairie out in Wyoming and bury them. So we've got big problems. Yeah.
I have a question for Richard, kind of a wrap-up question, I guess, is, would you do it again? If you yourself had another 20 years to go, would you start from scratch now and put up a solar system on your house?
I would put up a heat pump system, forget solar and wind. I think heat pumps are the way to go. We're going to be hearing, I think, more about it from Doug Edwards, if I remember correctly, in this series. But I'm much more interested in heat pumps as an efficient way. There's only one problem that I can think of with heat pumps, and that is that once you get your house set up for them, you hate to open the windows and let in the humid air. And so your spouse, in my case in particular, French and from Europe, who likes fresh air, finds that very cloistering. So you can't please all the people all the time.
Yeah. Hopefully the heat pump discussion will include not just air condensers, but ground. I mean,
Yes.
Around here, when the air gets down to 0, heat pumps get a little marginal. I had one in Cincinnati, and when it got down around 10 or 20 things, I had to switch over to electric. But if you had some picking out of the ground, pipes in the ground, that 50-degree temperature is there all the time waiting for you.
I have asked local heating contractors about putting in a geothermal system up at our lake house, and I am told the price is exorbitant. They won't even give me a quote. They said, you won't want to spend the money.
Wow.
Yeah, like $20,000 or something like that. You know, it's just really insane. And it's mostly due to the cost of materials and stuff in everything. While talking about heating and such and cooling, which the heat pump thing may come up, is I had an air conditioning guy come and fix my father-in-law's air conditioner. He said that right around the corner, there's all these new federal changes in the coolants used in air conditioning systems, and they're going to be very problematic and very expensive. They've got to, like, he as a technician has to buy like all new equipment to handle it, and that anytime it's got the tiniest leak, it's going to shut down everything, and it's just going to be kind of an expensive nightmare. So
yeah, I've heard that.
2 steps forward and 1 step back, I guess.
Well, they keep replacing them. And then they find the ones they've replaced aren't that great either, and so it's an ongoing saga.
So keep those openable windows, Richard.
Right, we'll try to do. That's a very good point. I'm looking at our agenda for next week. We've got October 14th. Does anybody know what's on next week, October 14th?
Yeah,
Concrete and greenhouse gas
That's
policy.
Doug Edwards talk.
Oh, that's our guy. Yeah. Well, that's it. That's going to be the exciting one to learn about concrete. Good. Excellent. Okay. And after him, we're going to have Ryan Pickering talk about all the latest things that are happening to nuclear. So we got some really good talks lined up. And then you are going to touch base in late October, Alan, with just renewables in general. So we're looking forward to some really good series. Okay, well, it's been really fun. I enjoyed this group always, and our discussion today I thought was quite fruitful. So you guys gals have a good Monday. We'll look forward to more meetings in future.
Do we have a
Richard,
Friends of Vision
Richard,
tomorrow?
thank you for doing the experimental work for us so that we don't have to go and install these systems.
Badly didn't hear about it sooner. I feel sorry for you, Lee.
Thank you.
Anyway,
Pleasure.
yeah, take care. Thank you, guys.
Richard, do we have a Friends of Vision tomorrow?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we're going to, whoops, no, I don't,
No.
we should. Let me think.
Well, it was, unless we're skipping.
What
two.
day is? Tomorrow is the 15th? No, the
No,
8th.
8th.
Yeah, I guess we should.
Yeah, I don't remember from the last one what
Yeah. Yeah.
what dates we chose.
Well, then.
We
we'll have
didn't
to
call it,
clarify.
but I think we should.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me. So we'll see you, Friends of Fishing people. Okay. Very
All right,
good.
you guys.
All right.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.